In this edition of Generations, we talk to Maria Miranda of Miranda Creative about her 30 years in business and marketing to the older generation. Luke Fry of the Connecticut Better Business Bureau tells us how his organisation is helping businesses and consumers. And it's our first birthday, and Judy Jenks from seniorcenterct.org talks about this one-year celebration. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith and welcome to Generations, a new podcast for people of your generation. Being in business for any amount of time is an achievement in itself in these modern times. Maria Miranda of Miranda Creative has achieved 30 years in the marketing and branding business. I caught up with her recently at their Norwich offices to talk about their 30-year success and how the industry is changing when it comes to marketing to the older generation. Thank you for joining us on Generations, Maria. First of all, we have to say, of course, congratulations, 30 years in business, which for any business is an absolute milestone.
Well, thank you very much. I began when I was 12.
And for those who are obviously listening and you cannot see, it is true. She is only 42. So, Maria, tell us a little bit about the company. I mean, you're a woman in business. It must have been tough back then. And even now, we're still seeing women entrepreneurs struggle with business. I
was 23 years old, so you get to know my real age, when I began working for myself. And there was concerns. I did have concerns about being taken seriously. I remember going to my first appointment wearing a pair of glasses that were actually clear plastic. They served no purpose whatsoever. I wanted to look older and wiser. Young was the first factor, and then being a young feminine entrepreneur was another factor, and then being a young feminine entrepreneur of Hispanic heritage was yet another factor. Eventually, talent won over. Good talent and good ideas was all that began to matter to people.
Also, you're working in the creative industry, which is a notorious fickle industry as well. It's also very tough to get into. What was the interest in the creative industry?
Sometimes you discover your undeniable strength early on in your life, and you can try to say, no, I'm going to be a paralegal instead, which was what was recommended to me. Can you imagine? Yes. So you can try to follow that path, but eventually your heart speaks anyways. So I was lucky enough to have won a poster design contest when I was 7 years old. And I knew then that this is what I was meant to do, to create pieces that communicated visually, and reached a marketing message. And luckily I had parents to help me embrace that side of myself, and here I am today. My early days, I was in the third bedroom of an apartment I rented from my parents, right? So going from that space to where we are today, sometimes we're in the conference room table that we're sitting at here together. Sometimes I will look up at this table and be like, who are all you people and where did you come from, right? But how we grew is we kept identifying what were the needs, and we kept adding talent to our roster who addressed and answered those needs. And we continue to evolve as a result, which I think everybody should evolve. There's no way to stay static and to stay contemporary.
That's a very good point, because I think too many companies, whatever industry sector they're in, fail to recognize that. I mean, if we just take, for instance, Toys R Us, now no longer around, companies do have to look at themselves, don't they?
They do, consistently. And you can see brands that thrive in change and those that do not. Right? I mean, when was the last time you took out your Blockbuster video card?
Exactly.
Right? They had every opportunity to evolve to a web-based version of their product, and they chose actively not to. Right? And the same thing with many forms of media. They chose not to. So, on the other hand, you can look at financial institutions, right, who have found ways to evolve, take a photo of a check instead of going there, ATM resources, online banking, being able to transfer funds to your phone. They have consistently evolved, and those institutions that do are still with us.
Who seem to be the ones who are the early adopters, who completely get it when Maria Miranda and the creative team go in, they go, yeah, we get that?
So I would say that those that are closest to the end market every day are the ones that evolve and get it the fastest, right? So recently we did a presentation about smart speaker devices and that resource for use in marketing. And, at the table was a travel agency, a real estate firm, right? And they immediately understood how amazing it would be to go to say, hey, Alexa, what's the cruise package available this week? And being able to get that answer and being able to then say, Alexa, let's book that, right? And so, those closest to the market are the ones that evolve the fastest. Those that are a bit more removed from actually seeing the people they're servicing every day, they're not necessarily aware of what's happening to their own market.
Now, marketing, advertising, branding, it's all sorts of areas that your creative agency touches upon. And of course, it's constantly changing. We spoke and touched upon that a little bit earlier in the interview. But the older generation, baby boomers, Generation X, I mean, they are now the majority and will be the majority for a very long time here now in the US. How has marketing and advertising changed towards this affluent, but very sort of like missed out previously group?
So, I call them by their proper title, by the way, the discretionary income generation.
Right.
Right. And, so, it's a very large population, right, in a very disparate age. And within that, there are those that are timeless in their thoughts of medias, right? And there are those that are very much static in their thought of media. So unfortunately, there has to often be a mix of what you're doing. You cannot rule out one form of media to another because of the size of the generation. But what has changed is communication that speaks to them in a methodology that can be easily absorbed and understood. Right. So there is really very few limits on, for example, smartphone technology that's fairly universal throughout, but there has to be thought given as to how you deliver that content from one generation to another. Right. In other words, videos are incredibly popular. People talk about video content all the time. However, the captions on the videos, if your phone's not set up for instant sound, cannot easily be read on the phone device, right, for any of us. And as a result of that, videos may not be the way to go for this generation. You may want to think about large, clear text, clear visual imagery, clear elements in language communication that can be seen and understood at a glance, as an example.
What do you think are some of the other mistakes that marketeers make that, that you as an agency have to say to them, hey, you really have missed this and this is why you're missing this?
I think one of the first common mistakes I see all across the board, including my stock photo options, is an assumption of the profile, right? That I probably could be a bazillionaire if I introduced a stock photo resource that targets a better reflection of how the aging demographic is actually living their lives, right? Active individuals caring about their health, doing so as a result often of insurance deductibles, right, to be honest, right? And to looking at those type of things. In the meantime, I'll type in something that says active senior as a photo shoot, and I'll get, chess players, right? Which is really not reflective of how active seniors are choosing to live their lives. Kayaking, taking amazing trips and vacations. They've taken good care of themselves to be able to enjoy this time in their life. And while some may be playing chess, not everybody is.
How are you seeing the industry change? I mean, obviously agencies like you are instrumental in helping organizations understand, the faults that they're making and saying, hey, this, you're not hitting the mark. This is what's trending. You're completely off message here. So how is it changing, and is it changing quickly?
So I think some environments are changing quickly and some are not, right? The case in point is the website that we're featured on and who we're talking about. That was created as a result of a series of senior centers coming together and talking about the challenges of newsletter reproduction and sharing of information and how long it would be from one newsletter to another for sharing information. Some senior centers can understand the benefits of a web-based environment, and some do not put the dedicated time that they should be in appealing to the audiences on there. But definitely, we can tell by the traffic on this site that seniors are interested in what's going on, actually, and there are adult children as well, and it's a great way for them to share information. I mean, think about how difficult would it be for, my mother in Rhode Island, and my sister in Florida to talk about a common element of a senior center near my mother if there wasn't a web-based place for them to go to universally to talk about what class she might be going to see or what trip she might be on. So I'm seeing some environments move forward and others staying static in the same resources because they're not aware that the market is diminishing until the market isn't there.
Do you also think that there's a misconception by younger marketeers of what a senior person actually is? Because I'm 48 years old. In a couple of years' time, I can be considered to be a senior. And I don't have a problem with that. But, is it a perception issue as well?
So I'm sure you're already getting marketed by AARP.
I am.
Right? And so, yes, there are many misperceptions as to what a senior is, right? And, it's definitely always someone older than themselves. Let's start with that,
Sure.
right? I'm not meant to be a senior, right? And I also think that, it's a misperception as to what that means for life, right? That it's like, it means that there's a change or a termination happening in life at that point. And there really isn't. It's just another chapter, and a great and beautiful chapter. So yeah, there's a lot of misperceptions. And I think, people like this website and Judy are doing things to change those perceptions.
The other thing as well is, of course, we are living longer, thankfully, through, modern medicine, also, leading healthier, more active lives. So again, is this where the marketers struggle? Because you said earlier, older people kayak, they hike, they do all sorts of things, which I think, younger people feel that after about mid-30s, it all drops off or something.
So I think, if you look at some of the marketing trends and some of the marketing data, and you can start seeing it in some of the imagery, like you might see, gray-haired models at LL Bean websites, et cetera. They've come to realize, as I call them, the discretionary income market, that they have time, they have resources, they have opportunity, right? And they're willing to explore ways to stay active and healthy. The smart market is also integrating that messaging into a way that will evolve with them. An example might be, we're talking about kayaking. An example might be a more ergonomically friendly paddle system, to avoid shoulder injuries, right? Or a wider opening in the kayak that makes it more possible to lower yourself with a little bit more strength and grace. So they would be very smart to not only evolve their marketing, but involving the products to be able to move forward with time so the market can use them longer.
And older people, are they more savvy, do you think? We know that they're technologically more savvy because they use smartphones. They use, like you were talking earlier, about things like smart speakers, Alexa. Are the older generation more savvy maybe than certain other parts of society because they take a little bit more time to do their research? And, of course, a lot of us are just instant gratification, where I think, is it a case of older people going, yeah, hang on a minute, let's just check this out? I think,
well, first of all, my mother is 93 years old, and she has a better iPhone than I do, right? And she's actually more savvy at some text abbreviations than I am because she took the time to look them up and to know how to use them, because that helped her communicate in a more briefer way. So I would say that, like in any population, there'll be, outliers who are more engaged or less engaged. But for the most part, for the middle ground, I think we're looking at combining two things: time and interest. Right. So as a result of the combination of those two things, they will have time for a higher level of research, and they will ask different, more in-depth questions. And I don't think that marketers should make any assumptions when they might hear an older voice on the phone, an immediate assumption that they're unaware. Right? Because you talk to my mother, and she will make it very clear that she's much more aware than you are. Right? And so listen before making an assumption.
And do you think as the market continues to educate and learn that we will see more changes, more visual changes, when we look around at maybe it's like billboards? Do you think we're going to see a lot more of this happening?
Oh, I absolutely think that we will, for a couple of reasons. The largest population right now, if you're not aware, is the millennials. They have surpassed the boomer generation in total population count. However, they're also the most encumbered, meaning they have the highest level of debt as a result of their educational expenses. So it will be a longer period of time before that market is free to step into higher income elements, such as buying a home, buying the better car, et cetera, et cetera. So as a result, where the revenue will be in the other demographic. And so they will have to, by law of supply and demand, to pursue that market until the incoming market is available for them.
Miranda of Miranda Creative, again, thank you for joining us on Generations.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
And you can find out more about Miranda Creative's services by visiting their website at mirandacreative.com. When you want to check out whether a company or business is legitimate and one that you want to do business with, how do you cut through the myriad of online reviews and comments and find out the truth about that company? The Better Business Bureau is one answer, and I spoke to Luke Fry of the Connecticut chapter of the BBB to find out more about what they do. Luke, thanks for joining us on Generations.
Yes, thank you, Brian.
So tell us, what exactly is the Better Business Bureau?
BBB is really a nonprofit whose mission is advancing marketplace trust. And what that means really is we really want consumers, and us being the Connecticut branch of BBB, we want consumers to be able to trust the marketplace here, trust those small businesses, trust all businesses, and really to have the most pleasurable experience possible when either buying a product or hiring a person or hiring a service.
So who actually funds the Better Business Bureau? I take it it's not government funded.
Sure. So we are not incorporated with the government at all. So BBB is obviously a nonprofit organization. However, the funds that we do get are from our accredited businesses. What that means really is a business that pays to have that seal of accreditation, of trust, of credibility from BBB, so that it kind of it gives them a leg up in other competition. It also shows, consumers that business holds consumers and themselves to a high standard, that if you have a problem with that business in any way, they will make it okay. And a lot of people nowadays, turn to going online and seeing if a business is okay, if they're trustworthy. And I really think that that's, why a business chooses to be accredited. They want that credibility, but they also want to show consumers that they're a great business to hire.
What checks does the Better Business Bureau undertake with companies and members who wish to become part of the Better Business Bureau?
In order to be accredited, you do have to have a background check and have us look into you as a business and also an owner of a business. We don't allow just anyone to be accredited. You have to be, credible and trustworthy. And a couple things we do look into, let's say, for example, if you're a contractor, that you have an HIC license, it's up to date, you have the correct documentation and, credentials that you need in your industry. We also look at the owner of that business. We see if they've owned any previous businesses in the past, because a lot of businesses that end up being fraudulent, the owners of them, once we look into it, have owned several other businesses in the past and have had issues and have complaints filed against them. So we always take a look at the background of the owner themselves too, to make sure that they are credible as well. We also do a background check on that person. And obviously, if you have owned a business in the past, or if you're applying for a business that's been around for, could be 10 years and you haven't been accredited yet, we see if you have any past complaints and see if you have any reviews on our site or any unanswered complaints. That's a really big problem when it comes to having a business. Having unanswered complaints is one of the worst things that you can have on your BBB profile, since usually on the profiles, if you haven't used BBB in the past, they have anywhere from an A through F rating. And the one thing that really hurts a profile the most is having unanswered complaints, because you should really be doing everything you can to make sure that your customers, your consumers, are as happy as they possibly can be.
What happens if a consumer is unhappy with a Better Business Bureau member? How can the Better Business Bureau assist them?
Sure. So actually, it's pretty much the same whether it's a BBB accredited business or not. A common misconception I hear from other people who haven't used BBB is, oh, I can only see accredited businesses on bbb.org. And that's really not the truth. All businesses are on bbb.org, but not all are accredited. So if there is a complaint towards a BBB accredited business, or even if it's just a plain old business, we take the same steps. If a complaint is filed, we let that business know via mail or email, and then they have a certain amount of time to respond to that consumer and really make right whatever that complaint is. And, it can vary too. A lot of people ask, well, what if some large corporation gets, 200 complaints in a year or a couple months, but they respond to all of them? Well, technically, they could still have an A on bbb.org then. Since they are a large company, they have a lot of consumers, could be nationally, and therefore, they're probably apt to having more complaints filed against them, as long as they're being responded to and resolved at the end of the day. Now, if it's a smaller business and you don't have as many consumers and you don't have as large of a reach, and you get, say, 2 complaints in a year, but you don't respond to any of them, that is going to knock your rating down, since you didn't answer any of those complaints. And it's really important, again, like I said, to make sure that you are trustworthy. You are able to be contacted if your consumers have a problem. And it's, again, all about making that marketplace a trustworthy place for all businesses, not only accredited businesses.
When we pick a company and maybe we're using an online company or we're using the internet to find out about them, when we read sort of reviews, sometimes those reviews are not real reviews. Does the Better Business Bureau sort of like enable people to feel more confident that the company that they're choosing or potentially using, is real, has got real reviews, as I say, as against some of these other services out there, which, tends to obviously not follow up as to whether or not the reviews are actually real or not?
Yes, and that's actually a great question. So if we do see a pattern of, exceptionally great reviews for a company, or we see a pattern of really bad complaints all coming in at once, we do take a step to really make sure that these are legitimate either complaints or positive reviews on a business, or it could be bad reviews too. Because we understand that sometimes there are situations where you could have one unhappy customer who calls their mom and their dad and their cousin and their brother and has everyone write a bad review for that said business. And we really look into who these people are. We double check and almost confirm with that business that these people were actually consumers or customers of theirs. So we do take a step to make sure our reviews are legitimate. Also, your other point, talking about, how do you know if reviews are real? And really our best advice is any third-party review is going to be more accurate or more trustworthy than reviews housed on that exact company's site. Since if it is a fraudulent company, it's most likely they are fraudulent reviews or, A+ ratings housed on their own site. So it's always best to sort of use BBB and read anywhere really those third-party reviews from real consumers.
Luke Fry from the Better Business Bureau, 7 Connecticut. Thanks ever so much for that great advice. And now people know a little bit more about the Better Business Bureau.
Thank you, Brian.
And to find out more about the Better Business Bureau or to check out companies, visit their website at bbb.org. And finally, Judy Jenks from seniorcenterct.org is here. Happy first birthday, because it's our first anniversary of doing the podcast.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
How's it gone for you?
I think the podcasts are fabulous. It gets us to think about things sort of in a different way as we come up with topics and speakers, and it really has broadened things, and it gives the public, whether they're seniors or they're not seniors, it gives everybody an opportunity to learn something. And then, most of the podcasts, as you know, are 2 to 3 topics. And then I come up with something I think sort of generic to talk about. And those are always fascinating to discover what those might be and then create that. And, we've asked a number of people to speak. We haven't had anybody refuse. So that's empowering in and of itself. And then I'm hearing more and more about podcasts. You can even watch the evening news, and they say if you miss something, check it out on their podcast. So we're cutting edge.
We certainly are. The other thing, of course, is we've never been afraid to touch on the lighter and the harder topics as well. I mean, looking back at the last 11 episodes, we've touched on some pretty hard, sort of like core topics. which are very important to people's lives. You know, when we were talking about with the surgeon quite a few episodes ago about, you know, sort of like the memory issues that you can have after surgery. But then we've also touched on, you know, lighter things as well, you know, like the cooking segment that we did. Do you think that's a nice cross-section? Because people don't want to hear doom and gloom all the time, do they?
No, and I do think that we have a great cross-section. You can learn something, you can laugh about something, and then, you know, like you said, the harder topics, the things that maybe we don't really talk about too much, it could be a gateway to bring up that conversation in your own family or with a peer, is to say, have you listened to this podcast? Listen to it, and then start the dialogue, how it might apply to them.
Yeah, absolutely, because, I mean, it is often, isn't it, hard to have conversations about some of these topics and some of these issues, because that's just the nature of being a human being, isn't it? We will avoid things, and then all of a sudden it's a case of, oh, okay, yeah, we need to have that conversation. Have you been pleased, though? I mean, you know, as I say, it's a year on from when you know, we came up with this idea. You said, you know, I really want to do this. Are you pleased with how it's progressed and, you know, the sort of reaction you've got from people?
I'm extremely pleased. I can't even begin to express how pleased I am. You know, it went from an idea that you really brought up, and I couldn't quite grasp the whole thing because I had nothing to base it on. I had no experience. But then as it has happened, you know, and you and I have talked about, you know, the progression and the different topics, we're out like 6 months ahead of ourselves on what we're going to be talking about. And then because you're so flexible, we can change things at the last minute if there's something that came up that we feel as though is more pressing. And if I look back to what we did for Medicare and open enrollment. Now, those topics will be timeless and really be educational to people, at least for the next 5 years, if not 10 years, unless there's a major change. But for the new retiree that perhaps is trying to figure this whole thing out, they could go back to the podcast, listen to all of those, get some sort of basis of what it is that might apply to them, and then find the rest of the information to make their decision before they retire.
Yeah, I mean, we hit Medicare pretty hard, but it was an absolute necessary thing to do. I remember having that conversation with you because there were changes that were happening to Medicare, significant changes. And, you know, and we hit that pretty hard over the course of, you know, several episodes. But the other thing that I really like about what, you know, we do with the podcast is people can go back and see the episodes, you know, by visiting seniorcenterct.org and going to the podcast page. All of the episodes are there, so you know you can listen on demand when you want to, and you know pick up on these, you know, these nice little stories. And you know later on this year we're going to have a couple of sort of like revisits. We're going to be speaking to Age of Majority again, who have got some fabulous news to tell us. And you know that was an interesting conversation because of the whole marketing to the older generation and this agency that they are, and it'll be interesting to see what they have to say a year on from when we last spoke to them.
Yes, and Jeff Weiss of Age of Majority, he really is cutting edge along with SeniorCenterCT.org because we understand, Jeff understands that the older buyer, if you will, is looking at the same sort of technology the younger people are to use to make their decisions on what do I want to buy? What's the best product to buy now that I know what I want? And more businesses need to tune into Age of Majority to really understand who these buyers are. These buyers are spending $2.9 trillion a year. That's a lot of money, and if you want them to be spending some of that money purchasing what your company provides, you really need to get your ad in front of them. And you can do that on SeniorCenterCT.org, of course.
Judy, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks ever so much, and we'll catch you next episode. And happy first birthday again.
Thank you, and thank you for helping create that first birthday.
You're very welcome. That's all from this edition of Generations. Don't forget to visit SeniorCenterCT.org to find out what's going on in your neck of the woods. And if you want to send us a topic to talk about or want to be our guest on the podcast, drop us a line by visiting the SeniorCenterCT.org website. Go to the bottom of the homepage and click the How to Advertise with Us link to get in touch. From myself, Brian Scott Smith, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.